advice do you have to homeowners?
Practicing that preparedness, starting the conversation now is always going to be a benefit to any association out there.
And welcome to Recovery Report Live. I'm Dan Odess, president of GlobalPro, where we manage your risk to recovery. And we have managed more than $1 billion in that recovery. We are insurance coverage experts. Real good reason why you should tune in every single week to this show, to this broadcast. Check out our website. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Today we got a great show for you. It's just me, no guests. There's so much to talk about, so much information I want to get through today in our 20 so minute episode of the Recovery Report Live. So thank you so much for tuning in. Disasters, natural disasters are just running rampant. I mean, we have so many things that are happening, right? There's between the wildfires to the flooding to the hurricanes, this massive earthquake that struck Mexico today. Our hearts and prayers are with all of the people in Mexico that are dealing with this tragic event that just occurred. Obviously, Hurricane Ida, there's a long road to recovery. You had storms before that. You have an active Atlantic that is, just churning out new storms one after another. Just keep your eye on it. We're definitely expecting some more to occur. Larry, big storm, not threatening really North America area, maybe, in the northern part of it, but that's still to be seen. It's way out there, right? So other than shipping lanes, it's probably not going to make much of an impact, particularly here in America, but you still want to take note of it. You want to understand that we are in the most active part of the storm season, right? I said it's running rampant, but it's really just running its course. Things are changing, and being ready is so important. Prepare yourself, be prepared. We talk about it all the time. There's so much on our website, on this channel alone, that is dedicated to making sure that you know what you need to do in order to be prepared. That means your business. That means your community association. It also means for you, your employees, your fellow colleagues, making sure that they have what they need or that you have what you need at home. Because as we do focus a lot of our attention on businesses and community associations, they're nothing without you as an individual, and making sure that your family has what it needs in the event of a disaster. And those disasters come in many different forms. We see the wildfires, we see the flooding, we see the hurricanes, we see the earthquakes. You see many different natural disasters, and we, again, are in the peak part of the hurricane season, particularly, but there's other disasters you need to be ready for. And, as you're traveling around, maybe because you've loosened up a little bit with the COVID and the pandemic restrictions, and you're leaving your home base, whether that's your business, your house, and you're going somewhere else, making sure that you have something to come back to is really also important. Making sure that those around you that are there to take care of your business or your home or your community association know what to do in your absence. I mean, a lot of times, you make this master plan, but you don't share it. And you want to make sure you're sharing this master plan with all of those people that are most important to making sure that your business, your community association continue to operate even in your absence. Right? So let's talk about a little statistics. I love to throw out some statistics to make you just really well aware and educated about the severity of the situation. More than 32% of the country's population lives in states or countries that were declared disaster areas over the summer by the Federal Emergency Management Agency. 32%. 32% of the country's population, that's America, country's population, lives in states or counties that were declared disaster areas over the summer. Again, we're in the peak part of the season for hurricanes. Already 32% of this country population are living in areas that were declared disasters. So just put that, think about that, okay? Think about that, all right? So let's talk about Hurricane Ida. We just saw Hurricane Ida hit the Gulf Coast very hard. Very windy storm, more so than flooding, right? And early estimates, right? So, what we like to do, you like to contrast that with history, right? So let's talk about Katrina. $86 billion estimated in damage caused by Hurricane Katrina. The early estimates for Hurricane Ida fall somewhere between 17 to 25 billion. But I love these projections because they're so early on, they mean really actually nothing. But it's just, contrasting, okay? Just for, discussion purposes, right? You have Hurricane Katrina. We know what happened there. We saw it. We saw the recovery efforts. I mean, quite frankly, before Ida, if you went into certain areas, you could still see the scar that Hurricane Katrina left on those communities. Now you have Ida come through there. A lot of wind, very strong, very impactful storm that lasted for days. Went way up the East Coast, right? Causing tremendous amount of flooding in the northern regions, right? Tremendous amount of rainfall. And, unfortunately, a lot of people in the Northeast didn't learn from Sandy. They didn't have flood. They didn't elect to carry the flood insurance. Even though you're not in the flood area, your mortgage is not required, your bank's not requiring you to carry it, doesn't mean you don't need it. Because these basements that flooded, there's no coverage. It's coming out of pocket. While flood coverage would be limited in those instances, it still is something. It's there to help you financially recover and rebound from it. Particularly for businesses or community associations, it's something you need this insurance, right? So, and as a homeowner, right, you don't budget for disasters like a business may actually do, right? You as a homeowner will almost never do something like that, right? So making sure you have something to fall back on, just because your bank doesn't require it doesn't mean you don't need it. And I think Ida, again, was a wake up, right? It just kind of, we had Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy from 2012, and now we have Ida, and you're seeing the subway systems and the dramatic footage of all these things. That's the homeowners that were impacted by this throughout the area. But bringing it back a little bit centered on the issue of Ida is that, there's a bit of I would say, a disconnect or a difference of opinion, if you will. Some are reporting that, 40% of the area may have insurance for the damages caused by Ida. A lot of people are saying it's a wind event. It was more so than flooding, right? So there's going to be actually a lot of insurance coverage for it, as opposed to if it was a flooding event and people don't have flood insurance and would be very limited in coverage. Typically on the wind side, if you have a big wind event, you have higher limits, you have more coverages, less limitations on it. Well, not so much, because after Hurricane Irma in this region and in the South Florida region, we saw extreme limitations on what would otherwise be known as hurricane damage is now suddenly wind-driven rain. And there's only $100,000 or total exclusions for those issues, even though it's not properly defined as something other than a hurricane. Or it's really unclear as to what the coverage in the insurance companies, after you beat them up a bit, they bend to your will, and they finally pay you, realizing that the exclusion doesn't read the way that they thought it should or believed it was intended. Whatever their story may have been, we've talked about different types of claim stories here on the show about how we've navigated that issue. Since when is hurricane something other than hurricane, right? It just, somehow they're bifurcating those issues. Now we have wind-driven rain, even though we had a paint exclusion caused by wind damage, now we have a wind-driven rain limitation or exclusion. So, some of the reporting, again, there's a disconnect between the reality of those on the ground that are actually helping the policyholder in the big industry. There's a difference of opinion as to what actually is going to cause the accountable damages for Hurricane Ida. Again, these early predictions are really meaningless. Don't give a lot of credence to them. Particularly you're looking at the contrast between Katrina and this storm, 86 billion to 17 to 25 billion. I can tell you, after Hurricane Michael in the Panhandle, the predictions were horrendous. They were all over the place. And then the storm was upgraded, so suddenly on their little fancy graphs and spreadsheets, the numbers went through the roof, right? But all of that caused delays in the claims process because the expectation wasn't there that there was extreme amount of damages, right? Oh, it was just a Category 3. Suddenly it's a Category 5. Oh my God, the place is devastated. Well, nothing really changed on the ground. While we're there helping the community, doing what we can, corporate America was there, handing out cell phones and utilizing the local resources. But the charitable efforts were by the local community, right? The organizations like GlobalPro that were on the ground giving out the water and distributing those things. I can't tell you how much of corporate America dropped things on these local communities, and they don't have the means to actually distribute it. So see what you can do to help. It's not a bad thing that they're doing it, but sometimes these things get wasted. Anyone tells you about clothing drives, a lot of charitable organizations will turn down clothes because of the efforts it takes to distribute it. All right, we've done this, right? After Hurricane Dorian, GlobalPro did a clothing drive. We sorted it, we labeled it, we cleaned it. We made sure that it went to the people that actually need it. We put it on a barge, we orchestrated the whole thing, the distribution of it. It did not get wasted. But it's just a little bit more complicated than just giving, right? You need to know where's it going and who's going to get it and how is it going to get to them is a very important part of the giving process. That's why we teamed up with places like Camilla's House, who's doing a tremendous job helping now homeless families after these 40, 50-year recertifications and the disaster that has come from this situation in the Florida region, right? You have associations, buildings being shut down and families not knowing what to do, where to go. A lot of times insurance is not stepping up to give them additional living expenses to move somewhere to do anything. Again, it's a complicated situation, complicated coverage issue. Did the association even report a claim? Is there coverage for that claim? Sometimes the coverage for a unit owner's insurance will depend on the type of claim or the coverage for the association. They're sometimes tied together in some situations. Very complex situation, and organizations like Camilla's House are stepping up and doing the right thing and trying to help. Talking about a lot of different disasters, right? There's a lot of natural disasters, though. That's what we're mostly talking about here. But there's other disasters that we're also contending with. Things are changing, right? Things are happening. Making sure you're prepared. That's what this is all about. Making sure you know what to do. Just look at the earthquake in Mexico that just struck, 7.0. I mean, the quake struck 2.5 miles east-northeast, right? And it's about 8 miles from the Pacific Ocean beach resort city of Acapulco, right? So major disaster right there. It was measured at an initial depth of 7.8 miles. At least 92 aftershocks. These stats, these numbers, the location to major urban areas is insane. It's called, I mean, if you're not seeing the videos, I mean, go check it out. Look at the disaster. And not just to be, not as part of your voyeurism on social media and things like that, but to learn from it. What can you do better for your business, for your community, for your association to be more prepared for things like this? These are extreme situations. And this brings me to my claim story, right? I want to tell stories as we're counting down to 10 years. March of 2022 is that milestone. Counting down to 10 years, 2022. I'm very excited about that milestone for us, what that means as a small business, the success we have had. But the success we've had is because of stories I can tell, the things that we've done to help. One story that comes to mind because of hurricaneida and the amount of flooding that was going on is a claim where we were actually helping the federal government and dealing and sorting with a claim that was actually initially denied by the National Flood Program. Now, how does this all work, right? So you have a local vendor that operates at a national park, and they buy a policy as they're required by their lease, which names the federal government as an additional insured. The lease assigns all rights and responsibilities and obligations to the federal government to deal with any sort of disaster situation, recovery, and rebuilding. Remember, recovery is different than rebuilding. Recovery is getting the money. Rebuilding is what you do with that money as to putting your sticks and bricks back together, the labor and the material, all right? Now remember, the denied claim, there's no coverage, no flooding. The issue is that the claim was reported early on. Now, I told you about how these storms, they change, right? So in the eyes of the meteorologists, right, the early reporting is a lot of times wrong. Why? Because sometimes the weather stations get destroyed, so they don't actually have proper or accurate reporting at that specific location. And then what you do is you have a lot of meteorologists to get in there, and they use what's called vector diagrams to try to identify, using basic science and math and statistics, what the conditions were on a certain location. And using that information, we then get flood maps, and then they have local people on the ground that go around and try to verify conditions. They look for flood lines of buildings. They do all this stuff, and then you get this very fancy map that shows where the actual flooding or they believe it occurred. Now, I've looked at some of the maps from Hurricane Irma and the impact it made in my actual community, where we have like 32 homes and then some neighboring communities around it. And we live near the water, Biscayne Bay area here in Miami, and I can tell you that the flood maps are completely wrong. I know for sure how many of my neighbors were flooded. I have photographs, I have videos of the streets. And I can tell you there was a lot more flooding in our area than what was on the flood map. However, in this situation, after Superstorm Sandy, when we got the flood maps, many months after the claim was initially reported by the actual operator, the insured on the policy, it showed extreme flooding in the area. And, well, I mean, it really didn't take rocket science or meteorologists or any sort of amount of science to verify that there was flooding there because there was flood lines on the buildings. But the adjuster didn't really seem to care about that, and he discredited that and discounted it. And then we got the flood maps, and we went back, revisited the claim, reopened it, renegotiated the whole situation. I was able to use, and I worked with a surveyor to find benchmarks, and we had to shoot surveys to figure out the elevation of the land as it once was and where it is today, because the sand shifted, and we needed to verify what the conditions were before and then after the storm. So we went through all this effort to try to do these things and working with the insured and identifying a surveyor that could do this with us, and we were able to use some simple instruments to verify that, in fact, there was, and we could confirm with almost certainty that there was flooding in the area. But then it was a question as to how much, because the flood adjuster was like, oh, I only want to cut to here. Oh, I want to cut to there. So we had to do this on each and every one of the locations throughout the park, and then eventually we resulted in a multi-million-dollar recovery. But it was fascinating that there was an entire legal team with the federal government there helping actually this business go through this process, right? They were responsible, they're charged with the efforts of making sure that there was any sort of recovery, that it was there for them. And going through this process, there was a lot to learn from it, is that even the federal government can get caught off guard by their own policies and procedures. So you as a policyholder should take the time to understand these things. And that's what we talk about, is that don't just go online to watch the videos, to see the disaster, to be in shock and awe. No, but learn from it. What happened? Track the events, see what's going on. If you really want to be active in the planning process for your own business community association, learn from the past, learn from what's going on right now in your backyard, in other communities that are being impacted right here in the United States. Learn from it, tune into this show, subscribe, like us and follow us on all the social media. We want to continue to provide you the information you can use as policyholders, as real estate developers, as business owners, whether it's in restaurants, hotels, whatever it may be. But to get that information you can use, this is the one place. This is a source to do it. I'm here every Thursday at 11 o'clock to deliver this information to you. So we'll see you next week on the Recovery Report. But before you go, hit that subscribe button, like us, and follow us on all the social media platforms. We're going to have a great guest on next week to dive more into these issues, to talk more about the things that are impacting you, about relevant information. So thank you for joining me this week on the Recovery Report Live. I'm Dan Odess, president of GlobalPro, where we manage risk to recovery, and we have managed more than $1 billion of that recovery.